Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a couple of questions. With only days left to decide, who will Americans vote for? Trump, Harris, or third parties? And who has the momentum to win the White House? Let's get to the bottom line. Campaigning reached fever-pitch levels this week, and now it's time for the final countdown. By next week, America will wake up to a new president. At least that's the plan. With all nationwide polls still putting Republican candidate Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in a dead heat, there really is no way to predict who's going to be first past the post. Will the American people help Trump achieve his dream of a second chance, or will they help Harris make history as the country's first woman president? If that happens, would Trump accept defeat? Which way will the swing state swing? How much impact will Israel's war on Gaza have on the elections in the United States? Let's get the pulse of the nation with only days to go before the big election. In the second half of the show, we're going to be talking with Semafor political reporter Kadia Goba. But first, we're talking with Linda Sarsour, one of the country's most prominent Arab American activists and co-founder of the social justice organization Until Freedom. Linda, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Let me just start out saying many Arab Americans are saying a vote for Kamala Harris is also a vote for genocide. Do you agree with them?
Someone in the Kamala Harris campaign has made a calculation that they do not need Palestinian, Arab American, and Muslim American voters to win. There is a genocide that's happening. This is a current, ongoing mass slaughter of Palestinians. This is not something we're talking about in the past. This is not just a general conversation on foreign policy. There is a genocide, and Kamala Harris has continued to parrot basic talking points around self-determination of the Palestinian people. She has said that she wants a ceasefire, she wants release of hostages, but there hasn't been action behind that. And we've seen the marginalization of Palestinian Americans in the campaign. We watched Dr. Ahmed Ghanim, a prominent Michigan leader who was removed from an event with Kamala Harris after he was cleared by security and received an invitation. We were, as Palestinian Americans, we were denied a speaking slot on the DNC stage, as you know, even though we also had the opportunity to listen to the parents of a hostage in Gaza. We believe that we had the right also to speak our piece and to be able to center the voices of our people. So all along in this campaign, Palestinian American voices have been marginalized and ostracized. And so that's on Kamala Harris and her campaign. It's their job to earn votes. It's not our job to give her votes, although she is not presenting any policy change or any break with the Biden administration. She's been asked, what would you have done differently? What will you do moving forward? And she continues to say nothing, that I'm not going to break from the party, that I appreciate Joe Biden. I can't think of a thing that I would have done differently than Joe Biden. So that continues to frustrate and outrage Arab American, Muslim American, and Palestinian American voters.
Well, Donald Trump has been out there, and we know he's reported to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to have said, do what you need to do. But yet there are a lot of Arab Americans that are saying they're going to support Donald Trump, or they'll support third-party candidates like Cornel West or Jill Stein. And there's some Arab Americans saying that's essentially a de facto vote for Donald Trump. Do you have concerns about the way some in your community are looking at Donald Trump as a better option than Kamala Harris in this moment?
Donald Trump is not a better option for Arab Americans and Palestinian Americans. I know this because I worked on the front lines against Donald Trump for 4 years. Donald Trump gave Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem, and he basically declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He supports settlement. He has people around him like Jared Kushner, who thinks Gaza is a great waterfront property. Donald Trump is not good for the Palestinian people. He is not good for Muslim Americans. And we know that. If any community knows that, it's ours. The sentiment is, and I'm not saying I agree with this at all, but emotional people and people who are being reactionary right now are basically saying we have to punish the Democratic Party, that voting for Donald Trump is a way to punish Democrats. I am imploring my community that Donald Trump is not the right choice and not to vote for Donald Trump. For those who live in states like California and New York and Illinois and Texas, look, vote your conscience. Go outside and vote for third-party candidates. We have to break this two-party system. But we have to realize that Donald Trump is not a walk in the park. And we know that as Muslim Americans. Now, people will argue that there is nothing worse than genocide. And I also have to agree with that. So again, we are really between a rock and a hard place. But again, as a Muslim American organizer who was one of the co-founders of the Women's March, and I organized for 4 years under Donald Trump, I know Donald Trump is not going to be good for Palestinians nor the American people. So again, it's a very difficult situation, but I'm imploring people in my community that they participate in this democracy. They focus on down ballot races, which impact our daily lives. So this is the hardest election that I've ever had to work in my entire 23 years of organizing in politics.
Linda, I genuinely don't know the answer to this question, but were you permitted to speak at the Women's March that you helped organize?
Oh, yeah, I was definitely speaking at the Women's March. I was one of the 4 co-founders or co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington. I took the stage as a Palestinian American, as a Muslim American woman in hijab. And immediately after that, I was attacked by right-wing Zionists. I was attacked by white supremacists across the country, death threats against myself and my family. And so I know what it means to organize under an administration like Trump's that literally supports this kind of behavior, and people who believe that they can be brazen and discriminatory and even violent towards people who look like me or have the views that I have. But look, I've also been discriminated against by the Democratic Party. My views have been condemned for my support of boycott, divestment, sanctions, for support of Free Palestine, of my support around police accountability in this country. So listen, I'm equal opportunity, and that's why our community feels so ostracized. We feel so marginalized because we don't know what our political home is anymore. And so again, we are in this election where we hope that we can defeat Donald Trump. And if Kamala Harris is to go to the White House, we're going to see her as our opponent. We're going to fight her every single day. We're going to push her to end this genocide and to start the pathway towards a free and liberated Palestine. So she needs to be prepared for mass movements in this country.
Cornel West has been on my show a couple of times. We've had fascinating conversations, and he's not shy about calling President Joe Biden, a war criminal. Is someone like Cornel West and the way he's communicating about the genocide in Gaza, the actions by Israel in the region, is his voice enough?
Dr. Cornel West is an old friend of mine, and I appreciate his intervention in this election for speaking truth to power. And yes, Joe Biden is a war criminal. Antony Blinken is a war criminal, and we will continue to say that, and hopefully one day they will be brought to justice. And, listen, Cornel West is not alone. Students across college campuses across this country, movements from climate justice to gender justice to racial justice movements has gotten up and stood up for the Palestinian people. They have been demanding an immediate ceasefire and an arms embargo against Israel. Historic organizations like the NAACP, the National Council of, the AME Church. So we see the solidarity. The people are with the Palestinian people. The majority of the people are. It's just those in power that have not yet heeded to the calls of the American people. So again, this journey towards a free Palestine is a long one, but we're on the right path. And we're hoping at some point one day very soon that we will get to go to a polling site in a presidential election and actually vote our values and vote our principles, that we are able to elect someone who is going to be a person who is committed to peace and diplomacy and not to continued wars.
We've been watching some officials of the State Department resign, issue protests about the State Department's unwillingness to restrict the sale of weapons to Israel based on humanitarian law, which is law in the United States. We've also seen recently a group of attorneys inside the Department of Justice write to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and say we're not following our own laws and rules and procedures by investigating the deaths of Americans at the hands of Israeli citizens and soldiers in recent years. They're saying the Department of Justice is failing to investigate the death of Americans. Is your organization involved in any of this? Can you be a partner in elevating awareness that in some of these cases with regards to Israel, we're not following our own domestic laws and procedures?
Yes, absolutely. We have made calls to this administration to get justice for Shireen Abu Akleh, for people like Aysenur, who is a Turkish American college student who was in Palestine engaging in volunteer work. It is outrageous to me every time I think about being an American and how my identity as an American is disregarded because I'm Palestinian or because I'm in Palestine or because I'm in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We are not protected as Americans within the occupied territories or in general inside the state of Israel. It is outrageous that the United States government continues to fund, aid, and abet Benjamin Netanyahu. What's so ironic here is that you will have someone like Kamala Harris or the Democratic Party go after Trump and call him a fascist, and he's part of a right-wing government, and we can't have a right-wing government back, and we have to be careful, and we're warning the American people. But here we are, the Democratic Party supporting a far-right government in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is a fascist. Benjamin Netanyahu is a right-wing leader. And there should be no reason why we are sending him blank checks to continue to slaughter the Palestinian people. We have to continue to hold our government accountable. And that's my job as an American. So people always tell me, what's your role? Like, what do we do? I say, look, these are people in elected office. You elected them and you can unelect them. We have to start organizing political power. And when we watch our colleagues and people inside of the administration who are resigning, we watch these letters coming out. Once again, people get upset when we say that the Israeli lobby has a stronghold on our government. People get upset with us. They call us all kinds of names for making that. But what other reason is there than your own people on the inside, people you've appointed to work for you, who are against you on this policy? The over 70% of Americans support an immediate ceasefire. The polls demonstrate that most Americans support some sort of restrictions on military aid to Israel, especially during this ongoing genocide. So who are you adhering to? Who do you listen to? And that is the frustration and outrage of the majority of voters right now who care about this issue. Many polls have shown that Palestinians, Arab, and Muslim voters are saying Gaza is our top priority issue. And it is my job to go into communities and say, look, down ballot races. Don't feel ostracized. Don't give up your right to vote in this country because you are outraged in this moment. Use your vote. And so we don't know what's going to happen in this election. It could be very likely that Kamala Harris goes to the White House because people are that afraid of a Trump administration. If Kamala Harris loses this election, I promise you it will be because voters turn their backs on the polls, on Kamala Harris, in the same way that she and the Democratic Party have on the Gaza genocide.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Linda Sarsour, Arab American civil rights activist. Really appreciate your thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We now turn to Kadia Goba, political reporter for Semafor, who's been covering the United States presidential campaign from the beginning. Kadia, what a pleasure to have you on today. And let me just start out. Kamala Harris is out there closing her message to Americans. So is Donald Trump. But one of the things she said caught my eye. Listen to what she said.
On day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list. Full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people.
Let me ask you, which of these messages, if she's right, is resonating with Americans?
I think her camp wanted her to be more spicy, make the distinction between her and Donald Trump. But then also there are the progressive groups who wanted her to say, you know what, you need to talk about what you're going to do for the people. So I think that encapsulated very much those two ideologies and those two demands coming from both sides of the party.
You've been all over the United States. You've been going to battleground states. What do you think Americans care about in this election?
The economy. And the economy means very different things for very different people. Jobs rate is always going up, right? But people are like, well, why can't I buy a home for, you know, at this age? Or Black people in particular are talking about institutional wealth, right? That is very different from, you know, maybe somebody suffering with grocery bills or doctor's bills. So all of that encompassing leads to the economy. But I can't take away from immigration. It has been a resounding issue throughout the country. And my hometown, New York, where—
Now you're talking immigration like anti-immigration, not pro-immigration.
Well, just the immigration issue, that the borders are open, too wide open. There are too many people coming across the border, and it is, to their eyes, taking resources away from them. And we really saw this a lot in New York after the 2022 election, when a migrant crisis started to come up in New York, which wasn't an issue in the past. It's a safe state where you can go if you are seeking asylum. That became an issue, and it put congressional races that will determine the House, the House majority. It put those congressional races in danger for Democrats because that became an issue.
Let me throw a piece of data at you. 28% of Americans believe America is on the right track. No political party in American history has won, has been returned to office after having numbers of support that low. Does that matter? I mean, and that includes Democrats, Republicans, Independents. 28% think the country's on the right track, which means a significant number think wrong. What do you think about that?
Yeah, of course. This is the damning issue, and one of the big political hurdles that Kamala Harris had to jump over time and time again. How does she distinguish herself from Joe Biden after serving and being his number 2 for the past 4 years? Of course. This is an issue for Democrats, and in particular in the House and the Senate, and especially for Kamala Harris.
A lot of anchors out there, news anchors, are saying it's not fair to compare Kamala Harris, who's really been on the campaign trail a very short period of time because Joe Biden stayed in for so long, to a Donald Trump. And so they're saying, oh, if you don't have all the pillars and plans of an opportunity economy, which he's pushing, worked out in your mind, that shouldn't count as much as Donald Trump talking about deploying the U.S. military against enemies within the nation, which is a pretty strident and shocking comment from anyone running for president, but particularly from someone who was president.
Sure. Okay. Each candidate has their base, right? We got to think about that 4 to 5% of American voters who need to be convinced. And I mean, I think the Democrats understood this was probably some of those disaffected Republicans who usually align themselves with the party, but just feel uncomfortable voting for Donald Trump again, whether it's for January 6th or whether they just disagree with him at large. That is who they're talking to. And they need to convince those people. And yes, I mean, I think both people need to be on point in their messaging to those specific people.
But we've got the Gaza crisis. You've got the increasing conflict with Lebanon. Do you think any of that's playing out there with Americans? I mean, particularly in Michigan.
Absolutely, in Michigan. I mean, we saw this at the start of Harris's campaign, right? People in the audience yelling pro-Palestine messages and her kind of batting them down. I predicted this was never going to stop. We saw it escalating in Michigan first, again, all the way back to Biden during the primary and the uncontested or uncommitted, yeah. The group of uncommitted. That is who these people are. They are upset about the wars, and they are disgruntled with the Democratic Party because they think they have a hand in whatever's going on because we're supporting, et cetera, weapon arms, et cetera. So yeah, we see this, and I think Republicans, seized on the opportunity by ingratiating themselves to the mayors, the Muslim mayors out there, who will, I think, have an effect on congressional races surrounding. Now, I'm not saying they're going to pull a lot of Democrats or a lot of Muslim Democrats from those congressional races, but I'm sure there's going to be a dip in the numbers, specifically in Michigan, and it's going to impact.
But along those lines, and look, I'm always cautious. I mean, you've known me for a long time, very cautious of people when they talk about third parties. I mean, our system is so driven towards a two-party stranglehold on the system. But you do have Cornel West out there, and you've got Jill Stein out there, and they could become pivot points in this election. They're not going to win, but they could become pivot points. Do you agree? I
mean, if you're talking about whether Muslim Americans will vote for Stein because she has been extremely pro-Palestine and articulated that, sure, that could be somewhat affecting the race. It's specifically in Michigan. I'm not sure if that's going to give her a boost, but as you point out, it could chip away at some of the votes that Harris would have had.
A lot of concern out there about President Trump is that he's going to eviscerate expertise in the government, that we're going to have political people loyal to him put in places that would normally have been with experts. And for a policy wonk like myself, that's highly disconcerting if that turns out to be true. Have we just moved into a place where so many Americans don't even think about that?
Donald Trump has been clear about this, right? And anyone who's not taking that seriously, is probably not as close as you and I to it. But yeah, there is an issue with policy, with Americans understanding how policy works or appreciating that that is a really disconcerting, as you point out, point of view for anyone seeking office and for anyone seeking office to articulate that. Yeah, that's problematic. But also, if you poll Americans, how many people know they're members of Congress, they probably wouldn't know that either. So while they are super engaged in these elections, and that's appreciated, on the policy side, we probably all need some civic classes.
I want to apologize to our viewers who have to, get a lesson in how American politics works, the Electoral College, and the fact that we have swing states. So if you lived in California, guess what? Your vote is already predicted, and that doesn't really matter. Oklahoma, the same thing. But there are about 7 states that matter in this election by most analysts' measure. And they are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. I've memorized all 7 of them. But I think it's really interesting that we're looking at those states and sort of look at, as you're looking at things right now, just on the eve of the election, how do you feel the breeze is going?
Such a tough question. All I can say is the races are those states are very, very tight, with Harris slightly leading a little more earlier in her 100-day candidacy, and then Trump somehow chipping away at that. But they're within a point difference. It is going to be a tight race, and I'm not sure we'll know the election results on election night.
Well, isn't Donald Trump making sure we won't by already saying that Pennsylvania's cheating and kind of laying down the groundwork for challenge?
Definitely, in addition to sowing doubt on the election. And yeah, I would imagine, I think Georgia is only hand count at this point. It's going to be a very interesting, very much a repeat of 2020, probably.
How is abortion playing in this election right now, and particularly in the battleground states?
Yeah, so I think Kamala Harris, took that opportunity to seize on that. This is the first election post the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And yeah, she's appealing to women. Women historically vote, at greater numbers. So her team is probably smart to focus on that. It is the difference between her and Donald Trump. She's focusing on women, putting abortion or reproductive rights first, while Trump has taken this posture of zoning in on men, specifically all men, and trying to bring that base out. And I think that's what Madison Square Garden was about the other night. This very much machismo look where Hulk Hogan ripped off his shirt again. I think if he understands that, he needs to bring out his base, which I have to say, Republicans have received some criticism in the past because they weren't really doing that, especially in those swing states.
I want to tell everybody we are getting a real treat here because Kadia Goba is fantastic, former colleague of mine, U.S. politics reporter for Semafor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? People around the world, not just Americans, are watching these U.S. elections because the winners' policies are going to reverberate in all 4 corners of the globe. For instance, is Russian leader Vladimir Putin going to get a state dinner at the Trump White House? Or would a Harris White House muscle up NATO in Eastern Europe? On the Ukraine war, these two have wildly different visions. What is sadly clear is that neither Trump nor Harris are promising much that's different in terms of American engagement with a stability that is both just and fair in the Middle East. We are watching a war continue and broaden, and my gut just tells me that Trump and Harris are going to continue to give a knowing wink and nod to the violence and the killings there, and not investing American resources in truly changing these realities. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm afraid I'm not. We'll know soon enough. And that's the bottom line.